focused on it in your remarks, and Facebook's inability to really move into that market because of the restrictions that the Chinese government would put on it. We received a number of questions, not surprisingly, on this from I apologize, Shinar Ning, AJ Ryan, Luke Duffner, and Alex Barker all ask some variation of the question, to what extent would you be willing to comply with China or other nations' demands to censor content on Facebook if it guaranteed market access? And to ask it just slightly differently, what would it take for you, if you're uncomfortable with the rules that the host government, like China, is imposing, what would it take for you to finally be able to move into that market?
Yeah, this is a big question. It's one that I've struggled with because, I mean, like I mentioned in the speech, our services aren't in China. I thought it would be good if they could be. It's something I worked on and explored for a while, and we just were never able to come to an agreement on what it would take to operate there. There are a number of things that I think are concerning. I mean, obviously, people focus on the censorship. I personally am as focused on a topic that we didn't talk about today, but is data localization in countries. Having to put, there's a trend around the world, this is not just a China thing, but a lot of countries are trying to put in place laws that you have to store local citizens' data in those countries. And I think that that's a very troubling trend because the reality is that most countries around the world do not have the same respect for human rights and rule of law that we have here in the United States. And I am worried as the CEO of this company that if I make a decision to store people's data in a country where there isn't good rule of law, that that's going to inevitably lead to people from the government showing up at the data center, demanding access to data. And this isn't purely academic. I mean, we had a case in the last few years in Brazil where a judge ruled in a case that they demanded access to some content. In that case, we actually didn't even have access to the content because it was on WhatsApp and it was end-to-end encrypted, so we couldn't even see it. But the judge ruled that the head of our office there needed to be thrown in jail until we somehow came up with a way to provide access to the content. So I would be very worried about localizing people's data in a country that doesn't have very strong respect for rule of law, because governments can bring to bear that kind of force, and I don't want to be in a situation where we have to put people's data in that kind of risk. So that would be a second issue that I'd think about, and these are for any country, not just China. The third is the precedent issue of, increasingly we're certainly seeing countries try to impose their speech restrictions beyond their country. From my view, it's one thing if a country wants to pass a law saying that certain speech in their country is not going to be allowed. There are many laws, many countries around the world, from the EU to different parts of Asia, where different parts of speech are not allowed. I disagree with most of those laws, but to the extent that those are democratic countries and they put those laws in place, we'll respect them. The thing that I worry about is a precedent where countries now are increasingly trying to impose what they want to say is illegal in their country more broadly. So, to broaden this out from just the conversation about China, there was recently a ruling over the last few weeks in the European Court of Justice. It's basically Europe's Supreme Court that says that individual EU states can now rule to impose that if content is illegal in a European country, that content needs to be blocked around the world. I just think that this is incredibly problematic and troubling. And there's going to have to be a lot of litigation to clarify exactly what that ruling means. Since it's the Supreme Court, basically, you can't appeal it further. But there is clarification as to exactly what they mean, and we'll certainly play our role in helping to litigate that and make sure that those restrictions are hopefully as narrow as possible going forward.